first question is from Doug Biddy. Mr. Biddy. Sir.
Creation of the centralised NICS HR function in 2017, the data controller moved to the Department of Finance for all civil service staff files. Given the security considerations for prison-grade staff, it was agreed that all live and legacy hard copies would remain within NI Prison Service headquarters.
Mr. Biddy.
Speaker, and the Minister will know that there have been concerns raised with the Information Commissioner's Office in regards to the break-in in Dundonald House and those who feel that there may be personnel files which were kept in there which were not secured. So can the Minister outline the processes for accounting for all personnel files, be they prison officers or anybody else from the civil service, particularly in transit between your department and the Department of Justice?
The member is correct, and it's well on the record that Dundonald House was accessed in recent times. The room containing the files in relation to the prison service was not accessed, and even if it was accessed, there was no access made to the storage facilities within which these files were held. So I have asked directly as to whether the room was entered or whether cabinets were opened, and the answer to both of those is no. In terms of transport, I understand that the files were transported securely in agreement with the prison service to a new location.
Linda Dillon.
Minister, given the recent break-ins at Dundonald House, can you give us assurance that all steps have been taken to secure Dundonald House going forward?
Since the break-in and further incidents of and attempts at unauthorised access, all locks on the entry-exit doors to Dundonald House have been changed. Chains and padlocks have been put in place where access is believed to have been gained. Access to the roof has been closed off, and 24-hour on-site security put in place inside the building. The Department of Finance is also arranging for wire mesh to be installed internally to cover up the windows on the lower floors of the building to help prevent further unauthorised entry, and has closed the pedestrian access point adjacent to Dundonald House. The need for ongoing or further security measures at or around the building will be kept under review by my department.
Kelly.
John Kelly, cast the question to
At the beginning of March, the Executive approved an increase to the procurement control limits to reflect inflation over the last 5 years and to introduce greater flexibilities for public bodies. The new limits were effective immediately. These changes allow public bodies to target spending below 50,000 or 65,000 for utilities to micro-businesses and the volunteering community and social enterprise sector. For these contracts, public bodies can seek price checks or quotations by email. The simplification means that businesses will not be required to use the eTenders NI system, which can be seen as a barrier by these groups. The flexibility will also ensure local accountability and allow spending decisions to be made locally. There are many reports which point to a risk-averse culture across the public sector. I would encourage ministerial colleagues to ensure their department is maximising the flexibilities the new limits create, and also ensure this flexibility is replicated in its arm's-length body, such as schools. In addition to flexibility in procurement practices, my department is currently in the process of raising the delegated limits, where departments are required to seek approval from the Department of Finance Supply Division. Again, I would encourage ministers to review the practice in their own departments to ensure that delegated limits for their arm's-length bodies are proportionate and focused on delivery.
Mr. Kelly.
Could the Minister maybe expand a little on how the new simplified procurement process helps local small businesses access to public sector contracts?
I am committed to ensuring our procurement practices are simplified and are easily accessible for local businesses, particularly as 85% of businesses here are between 1 and 9 employees, and 97% of businesses have less than 50 employees. The simplification of the procurement process and practices for contracts below 50,000 or 65,000 for utilities will mean that businesses will not be required to use formal tendering to provide quotations. This will make it easier for public sector to do business and, more importantly, for businesses to bid, negotiate and work in partnership with the public sector.
Neil McAllister.
for his answer so far. Minister, during the last 5 years, the health trusts in Northern Ireland have spent close to $3 billion in care home contracts without going through procurement processes. What is your assessment of how that spending aligns with the requirements and best practice, given that there are concerns around the lack of flexibility for those availing of places in care homes?
It's a matter for the Department of Health and the Health Minister, and indeed the Health Committee, to assess and interrogate. I think it's important that obviously public funds are used wisely and are accountable for, and we're getting maximum value for money, but also that small and medium enterprises are not ruled out or barriers placed in their way to accessing considerable amounts of public funding, which can make a huge difference to a small business and therefore make a huge difference to our local economy. But in terms of the detail of the member's question, I would encourage her to engage with the Department of Health in that matter.
Nancy Malone.
Minister, could I ask you, in regard to arm's length bodies, what methods or what mechanisms are available to the department to ensure that not only are proper procurement procedures adhered to, but also proper payment procedures?
Minister.
Well, each contract and each procurement exercise will have its own contract, which departments should monitor and satisfy themselves from the outset the procurement process has been followed properly, and that, as I said to the previous questioner, that value for money is achieved. The Department of Finance sets out policy in these matters. We can and will offer support to departments when asked for, but we do not have an interventionist role within the Department of Finance in regards to these matters. But as I say, I'm more than happy, where resources allow me, for my officials to support other departments if and when questions arise, or where queries arise around these matters, or where they want advice on best practice.
Mark Durkan.
I've had no specific engagement with the Minister for Infrastructure regarding a potential overspend by NI Water. My officials monitor each department's spend against budget on an ongoing basis through the regular forecast outturn processes. It is for each individual minister to manage their budget, including that of any arm's length body, in line with the allocation agreed by the Executive. I am aware of the Infrastructure Minister's statement regarding NI Water's budget position and her intention to appoint forensic accountants to investigate how NI Water have ended up in this position. That appears to be a very sensible measure, in my opinion. My officials will continue to engage with DFI officials in relation to the position of NI Water and its impact on the DFI budget, and will remain in close contact as this investigation proceeds.
Mr. Durkan.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Thank the Minister for his answer. The Minister has given his view that this is a sensible way forward from the Infrastructure Minister, and I don't disagree. But is he aware of any other departments or arm's length bodies who have incurred similar overspends, and departments have taken similar action in terms of recruiting or employing a forensic accountant to look at it? And what can and should we be doing to improve oversight and budgetary discipline of ALBs?
Minister.
Well, maybe in reverse order. In terms of monitoring of ALBs and arm's length bodies, there's obviously a role for the Assembly. There's definitely a role for the committees. It shouldn't be a case that arm's length bodies come into the committees, make statements, and if their statement suits the political agenda of members of the committee, they nod in agreement, or if it doesn't, you shake your head in disagreement. Arm's length bodies control and spend huge amounts of public funds, and I think the work of the committees and the assemblies is very, very good. It's not given enough credit, I have to say, but I think the committees are a great way of holding those arm's length bodies to account. In terms of the use of forensic accountants by any other department, I'm not aware of it. I think it's a very innovative approach by the DFI Minister, and as I said, I think it's a reasonable measure. If other departments feel they should follow suit, then I would encourage them to do so.
And the Minister indicated there that he thinks it is a sensible approach by the Infrastructure Minister, so can we take it that he agrees then with the Infrastructure Minister's approach to this issue?
I do agree. As I said to the previous questioner, arm's length bodies are responsible for spending huge amounts of public funds. And they're also they also have a responsibility to live within budget, as does their chief executives or their accounting officer. And their accounting officer has a responsibility to live within budget. So when an accounting officer steps forward and indicates or confirms that they can't live within budget, then I think the board of that arm's length body should be very concerned about that and carrying out due diligence. But certainly the Minister of the sponsoring department should be very concerned in carrying out due diligence in that regard, and I think in this case the Minister has acted appropriately.
Stephen McLaughlin.
Number 4, please.
Minister.
With permission, Ceann Comhairle, I intend to answer questions 4, 5 and 9 together and ask for an extra minute if that's appropriate.
Absolutely.
I have made clear to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury that we need investment in frontline services which support families, workers and communities. What we needed to see was funding for education, health and housing. It's disappointing that instead of this, the Chancellor Spring statement provides the continuation of austerity, neglecting investment in public services and yielding benefits that target some of those who need the most support. In terms of the impact on the executive finances, the Spring statement provided the executive with additional borne consequentials of 14 million in 25-26. Of this, 12.5 million is for Resourcedale and 1.6 million is for Capitaldale. Whilst welcome, these additional funds will not meet the many significant pressures on our budgets. These borne consequentials are unhypothecated, and meaning they are available to use. They are available to use in line with the executive's priorities and needs. The Chancellor also announced the creation of £3.25 billion transformation fund to support the reform of public services in England and Wales. The borne consequentials for allocations from this fund in 25-26 will be notified at the Whitehall main estimates in June. Consequentials in further years are likely provided in the spending review in June. Thank you.
Well, Ms McLaughlin.
Thank you for your answer. Minister, your ministerial call, the Minister for Communities has said he has not enough money in his department to mitigate the outline cuts to PIPs. Has the Minister of Communities met with you to discuss the possibility of mitigations, including providing funding for the long-awaited anti-poverty strategy that would actually help mitigate some of these far-reaching cuts?
Minister.
I've had no meeting with the Minister for Communities in relation to the current rounds of proposed cuts to welfare by Westminster. In fairness to the Communities Minister, I think he's waiting further detail from Whitehall departments as to how exactly these cuts will be implemented, over what timescales and what impact that will have on AMI, etc. In terms of the anti-poverty strategy, there may have been correspondence between myself and the Communities Minister, but I'm not aware of any formal meeting during my time in post in that regard. The Executive has, rightly so, invested a significant amount of money over a number of years in mitigating against the worst excesses of Tory austerity. We're now dealing with Labour austerity, but I would be very, very challenged to understand as to how we could continue to mitigate against the proposed cuts on the scale of them when you see the scale of what's being proposed in the time ahead.
Gemma Dolan.
And I thank the Minister for his answers so far. Minister, when will Phase 2 of the spend review be announced?
Sir, it's expected that Phase 2 of the spending review will be announced in June. And while it's a very welcome development in the sense that it will give us my ability to deliver a 3-year budget, present a 3-year budget to the Executive for resource and a 4-year budget for capital, I do believe that we're going to be facing quite a significant challenging 3 years as a result of the fiscal and economic policies being adopted by the current administration in Westminster. But what it will do, it will allow departments to plan ahead, and in terms of delivering public services, having that 3-year window is really a game changer.
Guy Middleton.
Mr Speaker. Minister, the Chancellor Spring statement outlined a significant increase in defence spending with a strong emphasis on investment in areas like AI and drone technology. Given Northern Ireland's increasing and growing capabilities in these sectors, Minister, what steps are you and your department taking to ensure that Northern Ireland businesses can effectively capitalise on these increased defence expenditures?
Minister.
I'm firmly of the view that there's enough rockets, missiles, bombs, guns in the world. We don't need any more. What we need is more teachers, more nurses, more healthcare workers, more special needs assistants, more domiciliary care workers, frontline staff, and a whole range of areas. So we do. There's enough guns and bombs out there. You only have to look at your television to tell you there's enough guns and bombs out there. What we need is leadership on the world stage that will bring peace to this planet and allow those, particularly from poorer nations, because usually what happens is rich nations make the bombs, sell the bombs, and then drop them on poorer nations. Let's give everybody a chance and move on from what is a disastrous policy being processed and proceeded with at this time.
Danny Baker.
Question number 6.
Minister.
The Digital Inclusion Team Go On NI programme provides free digital training sessions in libraries, community centres and hubs. These digital skills sessions introduce digital technology to people who are not familiar with going online and support people who want to improve their online skills. In the last financial year, the programme helped nearly 3,576 people with digital training. In addition, the Digital Inclusion Team worked closely with businesses in the community and last month hosted an online schools event for Safer Internet Day, which had 3,758 pupils registered from 51 different schools. My department is committed to maximising the number of citizens able to use online channels, including those to access public services and to access low-cost, convenient computing and digital skills training. Activity and initiatives are cross-departmental to ensure that we use technology to grow the economy, reform our public services and make life better for every citizen.
Mr Baker.
Minister, for your answer, and you touched on it there. The department is working in partnership with other departments, and is it working with more sectors to improve digital inclusion?
Minister. The Digital Inclusion Unit has aims of getting citizens online, promoting access to high-level digital skills and supporting the digital economy. It achieves this by coordinating activities and projects, creating partnerships, including with Ofcom, as I said, libraries, supporting communities and other government departments, and with other devolved administration. The unit also works in partnership with the public, private, voluntary and community sectors in delivering joint up, working through Digital Assets Steering Group.
Orlea Flynn.
Question number 7, please.
Sir.
With your permission, Mr Speaker, I will answer questions 7 and 12 together. I am pleased that Professor Holtham is conducting an independent review of our level of need. This work is essential if we are to make a case to the British Government for a higher relative need factor to be included in our funding arrangements. Professor Holtham's review is ongoing, and I expect a report from him later this month in order to inform Phase 2 of the spending review, which is due to conclude in June 2025. Officials in my department are providing technical and administrative support to Professor Holtham as he requires it. It's essential that the Executive is funded fairly and sustainably to ensure us to deliver the public services our people deserve. That is my focus and the purpose of this work.
Ms Flynn.
Thanks very much. Can the Minister explain why should the 124% needs-based factor be amended?
Minister.
I think it's a general view of Executive colleagues that while it's very welcome that we're now receiving funding at 124, that the level of need here is actually greater than that, and that Professor Holtham's review is very timely in that in terms of the spending review. It's been clear we've been underfunded for many, many years. I'm old enough to remember when we used to call for more funding that we were accused of going to Downing Street with a begging bowl in our hand. But in fact, we were proven correct all along that we were underfunded. If we are to drag our public services up to an appropriate level, then we need the funding to do it, and we need that funding to support those who are working in the public services, who, despite all the pressures that are thrown at them on a daily basis, go above and beyond the call of duty to help our citizens.
Andrew McMurray.
Thank you for the answer so far. It is a few months really sufficient time for a review so fundamental for our public finances to take place?
Minister.
Yes, I think it is. And the time frame perhaps not set by ourselves, but in terms of the spending review, I think that the work that's been carried out over a number of various reports, including the work of the Fiscal Council, provides a good platform for Professor Holtham to work on. He obviously will have access to all the data and will come to his own independent conclusions on that regard. But I do think the time frame, not ideal, but I do believe it is achievable.
Timothy Gaston.
Much, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly welcome the appointment of Mr. Hotham to identify the up-to-date level of need for Northern Ireland, having mentioned his work in the Assembly in the past. Can I just ask the Minister, as part of his review, will he be taking submissions from parties or indeed MLAs?
Minister.
No, it's largely a desktop review in terms of data and provisions. So it's not that type of review. I don't think the time frame would allow for that. It's really accessing papers and data to bring forward the report.
Justin McNulty.
Hold, can call it.
Sir.
Since the relaunch of the Back in Business scheme in May 2024, 36 businesses have benefited from the 50% rates discount, provided more than £93,000 in rate support. The Back in Business scheme aims to help bring vibrancy, footfall and investment back to our high streets, while providing businesses with a boost at the start of their business journey, helping to support jobs, bringing long-term vacant units back into use. The scheme offers businesses a 50% rates discount for up to 2 years if they move into a business which were previously used for retail purposes and have been unoccupied for 12 months or more. I am grateful to the Assembly for their continued support and renewing the scheme earlier this month. I would urge anyone planning to start a business or expanding their existing business to consider setting up in an empty unit and avail of the rate support on offer through the Back to Business scheme.
Mr. McNulty, yes.
Count Carter, thank the Minister for his answers thus far. Has the Minister given any consideration to learning from the success of Atlantic Link Enterprise Campus and potentially expand to the more enterprise zones here in the north to tackle dereliction?
Minister.
It would sound maybe perhaps more of a Department of Economy programme, but I'm more than happy to work in conjunction with any Minister to see how we can support businesses, how we can ensure that we do bring our high streets back, how we create new innovative businesses and create employment as well. I am awaiting the final draft of the cost of doing business report, which I think will also be beneficial in these discussions.
Question 11.
Minister.
There has been significant progress across the 4 city and growth deals, with many positive milestones achieved over this last year. The Belfast Region City deal is in delivery phase, with legally binding contracts for funding, planning permission and construction commencing across many of the projects. The Derry City and Strabane District Council City deal signed its deal in September 2024. Council is finalising the required deal documentation and working on legally binding contracts for the most advanced projects, which will allow funding to flow. The 2 growth deals, Causeway Coast and Glens and Mid-South West, signed heads of agreements last year and are working on outlined business cases to progress towards deal signing. The A4 Enniskillen Bypass project, part of the Mid-South West growth deal, is currently in delivery, as funding was made available for this project by the Executive in February 2024.
Ms Hargey.
Thanks very much for your answers, and it's just to see, Minister, what benefits you will see these city growth deals delivering, and I suppose complementing the programme for government and the budget that you announced earlier today.
Minister.
The £1.3 billion investment in the 4 city and growth deals will support significant shifts in many of our indicators, such as improving regional balance, creating employment opportunities on increasing productivity. Across the 4 deals, there are 50 projects at full business case stage. Each project will specify the benefits to be realised from that project. Identified benefits will include job creation where appropriate. I also think one of the benefits of the city deals has been the collaboration between the Assembly and the Executive and local councils in delivering these projects. I think it has that local dimension at local council level has been vitally important in this, and the delivery of these projects will make real changes to people's daily lives, the economy and the well-being of citizens.
John Bunting.
Please, Mr. Speaker.
Sir.
The Registrar General Office has data sharing arrangements in place with several agencies which enable death registration data to be provided to them. These data sharing arrangements enable the transfer of information on a weekly or monthly basis and contain only those data items permitted by data sharing legal powers and agreed with the organisation in the relevant data sharing agreement. There are no arrangements in place to automatically notify agencies and statutory bodies when a death is registered. GRO officers are currently scoping out legislative pathways which will allow for increased data sharing arrangements. However, it will take time to progress this work and to put the necessary legislation in place.
Ms. Bunting.
I'm grateful to the Minister for that answer, and he's highlighted the fact that they are working on it. The Minister will be aware that in Great Britain there is a campaign called Tell Us Once, and that is being promoted by Marie Curie here, and as chair of the APG for terminal illness, I would be keen to see that those in bereavement would only have to notify one agency to ensure that they don't have to keep repeatedly making calls in a time of grief. Could the Minister indicate, obviously he's taken this forward, but could he give us any indication of timeframes and scoping for such legislation?
Minister.
I can't give the member any times at this stage. The work is at an early stage in regards to this, but it is important for the very reason the member outlined, to Tell Us Once, to assist grieving families at that most awful of times immediately after the death. So I will update the member with more information, but I agree with the objectives of the campaign.
Emma Sheeran.
The Minister has just answered my question.
Okay, move on then to Colm Gildernew. Minister.
The member will be aware that the Baby Loss Certificate Scheme has been taken forward as quickly as possible to give bereaved families the opportunity to have formal recognition of their loss. I want all parents and families who suffered the devastating loss of a baby to feel that their grief is recognised. The Death and Stillbirth and Baby Loss Bill, which will provide a power to make these regulations, is, as the member will be aware, is currently being discussed through its second stage in the Assembly today.
Mr. Gildernew.
Cormac, and I thank the Minister, and I'm aware that you are dealing with this in more detail today, but for now, can you just outline in brief what a baby loss scheme might entail, Minister? Thank you.
A Baby Loss Certificate Scheme is intended to recognise the grief and pain which many families feel in the event of a loss of a baby in the first 24 weeks of pregnancy. Although a certificate cannot undo this suffering, the scheme will recognise and validate their loss, which is often a very private matter in the same way that stillbirth or death certificates do. The scheme will be entirely voluntary, with no legal requirement to record the loss. The resulting certificates will have no legal standing, but will provide a formal means of recognising the loss and its impact.
Carla Killian.
Question 15.
Minister.
I have just received today a copy of the report of the cost of doing business from the Ulster University Economic Policy Centre, which I will be considering. The study was commissioned following concerns raised in the aftermath of the British Chancellor's autumn budget. The research has looked at the impact of labour costs, energy, property, transport, materials and insurance costs on sectors and by business size, as well as the VAT differential for the hospitality sector on the island. The report provides me with a strong independent evidence base to present a case to Treasury ahead of the June spending review. I will also be sharing with my ministerial colleagues as the impact will be felt by employers in both private and public sector, including voluntary and community and healthcare providers.
Mr. Killian.
I appreciate the Minister still looking at the report. but even at this stage, could he even give an indication of what actions he's minded to bring forward after his final consideration into the report, The Cost of Doing Business?
About half a minute, Minister, please.
I have, as a member said, I've literally received the report today into my inbox. I will study it closely. Obviously, we want to carry out whatever measures we can to support businesses moving forward. We already do quite a considerable amount of support for businesses through our various rates relief scheme. We talked earlier about the Back to Business scheme as well. So we'll see what additional support is achievable within the limited resources available to the Executive at this time.
That brings us to a conclusion of the oral questions. Move now to the topical questions, and I call Colm McGrath.
Mr. Speaker, Minister, not long ago you and your executive colleagues published a programme for government that promised to, quote, do what matters most. Can you provide assurances that all of the necessary finance is available to deliver upon the priorities and promises in that document?
Mr.
The budget sets out what will be financed in this financial year, and as the member will be aware, is aligned with the programme for government. I look forward to being able to present the Executive with a 3-year resource budget and a 4-year capital budget later in the autumn, which will all further allow the Executive to fund the priorities through the programme for government. As I said in the earlier question time, I believe the next 3 years are going to continue to be very challenging financially, but the fact that we can plan for 3 years is a game changer.
Mr. McGrath.
Given that just about 5% of the overall budget deals with the priorities in the programme for government, Minister, which do you believe is most lacking, the overall percentage of funding available for the priorities or the ambition of the programme for government?
Minister.
I find lacking the absence of an alternative from the opposition. So, you can't simply stand up anymore and criticise. Well, you can criticise what the Executive is doing. Of course, you should challenge what the Executive is doing, and you should question what the Executive does. But a year in, it's time to see some paperwork from you. You know, it's time. It's time to see some paperwork which sets out what you would do differently. Now, in terms of I think the programme for government sets out a realistic programme of work for this Executive. I think the budget that is set out matches that, and as I said, we will be delivering a 3-year resource budget and a 4-year capital budget later in the autumn.
Ennis.
Can the Minister provide an update on the work of the Interim Transformation Board?
Minister.
Yes, this morning I met with Fleur Anderson, the Minister of State from the NIO, to discuss the next steps in relation to the Interim Transformation Board. I hope to be able to go out to executive colleagues in early summer and ask for further bids in relation to the remaining funds of around £102 million. And in conjunction with that, the Board and the TEO are also studying the digital maturity projects that have been submitted as well. So I will be appointing further members to the Board as well, and confirming the terms of reference. So the work of the Board continues, and the further transformation project bids will be asked for by early summer.
Ennis.
Thank you, Minister, and I appreciate that response. Can you just tell us, Minister, how much funding is allocated for transformation projects in the 25-26 budget?
Minister.
I think it's around, in this financial year, I think it's around £21 million has been allocated. As the member will know, the Transformation Fund has been profiled over 5 years. We are engaging with the Treasury around how that profiling will work and how it will match the ambitions and the strategies of the Transformation Board and the Executive, but we're confident we'll be able to match those two up.
Mr. Trevor Clark.
I'll ask the Minister, I don't know if you heard the interview last week from the Chief Constable in terms of the pressure within police numbers, but can I ask you, Minister, has the Justice Minister made any specific bids to address the issue of the recruitment within the PSNI?
Minister.
I didn't hear the entirety of the interview. I heard some of the interview, But the member will be aware that the Justice Minister has submitted a business case to my department. That business case, and for the record, is not on my desk. It is being studied by departmental officials, as would be the case for any business case that comes into the department. And at the appropriate case, it will be submitted to me. So once the business case has been appropriately analysed, I will engage with the Justice Minister on the way forward.
Mr Clark.
The Minister has said in relation to business cases. However, I suppose given that there's a commitment from within the Executive and all of the Executive Ministers in the programme for government to address the shortfall of numbers within the police, given there was an original commitment of 7,500, I think now the target's even 7,000. So can I ask you, Minister, regardless of what the business case would say, given that this is a strong case made by the Chief Constable and indeed supported by evidence across the water, what support he would give to it, regardless of what that case would say?
Minister.
As I said earlier during the statement in relation to the budget, I'm not going to set my spending priorities on the latest headline or whoever seeks the most dramatic headline. No, it is because if I follow that course, somebody tomorrow will have an even more dramatic headline than the one today. So the business case, I cannot simply disregard a business case. The business case is there to protect public funds. If the business case stacks up, well and good. I will take the next step then along with the Justice Minister as how we identify the £200 million to direct towards policing over a 5-year period. Currently that £200 million doesn't exist. It simply doesn't exist. So we'll have to look at it over the spending period of that business plan, and I think the spending review gives us a great opportunity to plan on the way forward.
Question 4 is withdrawn. Call Harry Harvey.
Mr Speaker, what discussions have you had, Minister, with your devolved counterparts and with the government in relation to the impact of US tariffs?
Minister.
I had no opportunity as yet to have discussions with finance ministers in the devolved institutions. I understand that the economy minister is taking forward discussions with the devolved institutions in relation to the impacts of tariffs.
For your answers so far, Minister. Minister, has any initial work been done to undertake and establish what sectors will be worst impacted in this part of the UK specifically?
Minister.
Again, I understand the economy minister is leading in this regard, and of course I'll work closely with her in that matter in terms of any financial concerns or pressures that are placed on our businesses. But I come back to the point, we are working in significantly constrained financial times, and it would be I can't raise expectations beyond reality.
Emma Sheeran.
Concordia, Minister, can you provide an update on last week's NSMC meeting, please?
Minister.
Attended last week's NSMC meetings in terms of SUPB as a sponsor minister for that department. A very useful engagement with our southern counterpart and the SUPB about the projects and the work they are doing, which are making real differences in communities and people's lives, supporting businesses, community projects, education projects. So it has been a very important piece of work.
Sharon.
Concordia, August Minister, would you be able to provide an update on the Peace Plus programme, please?
Minister.
Again, it's rolling out. The SUPB are managing the project with bids being processed and hopefully funding issued in the time ahead. I think the PEACE programme from its inception has made a huge difference to the society across all sectors and has proven invaluable in creating the positive change across our society.
Number 7 is withdrawn. I call Gemma Dillon.
Corlia, can the Minister outline the main changes in the final 25-26 budget from the draft budget?
Minister.
Yeah, as I announced this morning, we have ring-fenced a significant amount of the Department of Health money to tackle waiting lists. We have added an additional £50 million in that regard to tackle waiting lists, along with the 165 ring-fenced. We have increased skills spending by 7 million, bringing it up to 15 million. We've added an additional 15 million for special educational needs. We have ring-fenced £5 million for the protection of Lough Neagh, and directed significant amounts of money towards Invest NI through the Department for Economy to support and create jobs.
Ms Dolan.
Minister, you mentioned the money towards the waiting lists. Will health benefit any further in this budget?
Minister.
I don't think we will see the significant Barnett consequences which we witnessed last year, but I suspect there will be Barnett consequences flow as part of the spending review in June, and obviously it will be up to the Executive to decide as to where that funding goes. The Health Minister is bringing forward a plan to the Executive in relation to the release of the additional 50 million. I look forward to seeing that. If the Health Minister indicates that he can spend more than that on programme for government priorities, then that's a question which will have to be put to the Executive.
Owen Tennyson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, can I ask if you've yet received a copy of Professor Jerry Holtham's review into the needs-based formula?
Minister. No, I haven't received a copy of it yet.
Mr. Tennyson.
And, Minister, given that the independent review of funding in Wales was conducted over a period of 18 months by a number of individuals, are you absolutely confident that this desktop review, as you referred to it earlier, is sufficient?
Minister.
I think Professor Holtham, as one of the people who was involved in the review of the Wales formula, is very familiar with this process. He has a lot of casework and documentation to build on and learn from, so I am confident that Professor Holtham will be able to carry out the task and provide us with that independent oversight that is required.
Mr. Bradley is not in his place, so that brings to a conclusion questions to the Minister of Finance. Very commendable, Minister. Like Mr. Lyons, you've got through all of your questions, both fronts, so we congratulate you for that. Mr. Given didn't quite do that. He got close in the